He sat there, his hands clasped so tightly under the conference table that his knuckles ached, as his boss's voice sliced through the room with the precision of a well-aimed blade. "You think you can handle this project, Marcus? I mean, let's be real. Do you even understand what we're discussing here?" The words weren't just a question. They were a calculated strike, delivered with a smug grin that made Marcus's skin burn with a mix of anger and shame. The conference room, packed with 20 colleagues, fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. Every eye darted between Marcus's stoic expression, his jaw set like stone, and the self-satisfied smirk of their manager, Richard Caldwell. It wasn't the first time Richard had singled him out, but this moment, with the entire team and senior executives from the New York office watching, was different. It was a public humiliation laced with a venom that carried a deeper, uglier implication, one that everyone in the room could feel but no one dared to name aloud. This wasn't just about Marcus's work. It was personal, rooted in a prejudice that Richard had never bothered to conceal. This meeting, this moment, would be the spark that changed everything. Wherever you're reading this, whether you're navigating the bustling streets of New York, braving the rainy avenues of London, standing on the windy corners of Chicago, or walking the vibrant neighborhoods of Manchester, pause for a moment to reflect. Have you ever witnessed or experienced workplace humiliation that crossed a line? Maybe it was a comment that cut too deeply, a moment when someone's bias was laid bare in front of others, leaving you or someone else exposed and diminished. Share your thoughts below, because stories like this demand we speak up, confront injustice, and hold those in power accountable. Your voice can be the start of change, and together, we can shine a light on the moments that too often stay hidden. Marcus Thompson was a 32-year-old data analyst at Pinnacle Solutions, a mid-sized tech firm headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia. For 3 years, he'd carved out a reputation as a meticulous professional, someone who could unravel the most tangled datasets with a clarity that left his colleagues in awe. His work wasn't just good, it was exceptional, the kind that made managers take notice and earned him quiet respect from his peers. Marcus was the one who stayed late, long after the office lights dimmed double, checking reports to ensure every number was airtight. He was the colleague who offered a kind word to nervous new hires, helping them navigate the high-pressure world of corporate analytics with a calm, encouraging presence. His quiet confidence and unshakable professionalism under stress made him a standout, even in a competitive environment where excellence was expected. But beneath his composed exterior, Marcus carried the weight of being the only black analyst on his team, a fact that seemed to linger in the back of his boss's mind like an unspoken accusation. Richard Caldwell, at 45, was a manager who'd climbed the corporate ladder not through brilliance, but through charm, connections, and a knack for dominating any room he entered. He was loud, brash, and thrived on being the center of attention, his voice often drowning out others before they had a chance to speak. To Richard, leadership meant asserting his own ideas, often at the expense of those around him. For Marcus, Richard's behavior had always carried a subtle but unmistakable edge of disdain, a sharpness that cut deeper than it should have. It showed in the way Richard would interrupt Marcus's presentations with a condescending chuckle, as if his insights were trivial or amusing. It was in the way he'd simplify Marcus's meticulously crafted reports without asking, as if Marcus couldn't be trusted to communicate effectively to the higher-ups. These slights were small enough to evade HR complaints, subtle enough to be dismissed as oversensitivity, but they were sharp enough to leave a mark, like paper cuts that never fully healed. Colleagues noticed, some would exchange uncomfortable glances, others would offer Marcus a sympathetic nod in the hallway, but most chalked it up to Richard's tough love management style. They'd whisper that he was just hard on everyone, but Marcus knew better. The offhand jabs about his urban background, the way Richard would question his qualifications despite his stellar track record, told a different story, one that Marcus had heard too many times before. The tension between them had been simmering for months, like a pot left too long on the stove, the heat building until it threatened to boil over. It wasn't just professional disagreements. It was a pattern of behavior that Marcus had learned to navigate with gritted teeth and forced smiles. He'd dealt with microaggressions before, not just at Pinnacle, but throughout his career. He'd graduated from Morehouse College with honors, worked his way through late nights and early mornings to build a career he was proud of, only to face the same tired stereotypes time and again, assumptions about his competence, his background, his place in the room. But Marcus had always chosen to let his work speak for itself, believing that excellence would eventually drown out the noise of prejudice. He'd built his career on that belief, trusting that his results would outshine the biases of those around him. That belief was put to the ultimate test during the quarterly strategy meeting in October 2025, a moment that would define his time at Pinnacle and beyond. The meeting was a high-stakes affair, one that had the entire Atlanta office buzzing with nervous energy for weeks. Senior leadership from the company's New York headquarters had flown in, and the pressure was on to impress. The conference room was packed, with 20 people seated around a sleek glass table, the New York executives, led by Vice President Karen Ellison, positioned at the head like judges in a courtroom. Marcus had spent weeks preparing a detailed analysis of customer retention trends, a critical piece of Pinnacle's growth strategy for the coming year. He'd poured hours into refining his slides, checking every date, the point, and rehearsing his delivery until he could recite it in his sleep. This was his moment to shine, to show the company's top brass what he was capable of, to prove that he belonged at the table. As Marcus stood at the front of the room, his slides projected on the screen behind him, he felt a surge of confidence, a rare moment of clarity amid the pressure. His voice was steady as he walked through the data, churn rates, customer feedback patterns, and actionable recommendations to boost retention. He broke down complex trends into clear, compelling insights, his tone professional but engaging. The room was with him. Colleagues nodded in agreement, some jotting notes, and even Karen Ellison, the formidable VP from New York, seemed impressed, her pen moving quickly as she scribbled in her notebook. Marcus was hitting his stride, his analysis landing with the kind of impact he'd hoped for, when Richard leaned forward in his chair, his lips curling into a smirk that Marcus had come to dread. It was a look that promised trouble, a warning that something was coming. "Hold on, Marcus," Richard interrupted, his voice loud enough to halt the presentation mid-sentence, cutting through the room like a whip. "Let's not get too technical here. I mean, you're throwing around all these numbers, but do you really get what's at stake? Or are you just reading off the slides we gave you?" The words landed like a punch, sharp and deliberate, designed to wound. The room fell into a stunned silence, the air thick with tension. Marcus's jaw tightened, but he kept his composure, years of practice keeping his face neutral despite the heat rising in his chest. He could feel every eye on him, the weight of their stares pressing down. "I prepared this analysis myself, Richard," he said calmly, his voice steady but firm, a quiet assertion of his truth. "The data shows—" "Oh, come on." Richard cut in again, his tone louder now, almost theatrical, as if he were performing for the room, reveling in the attention. "You think you can handle this project? I mean, let's be real. Do you even understand what we're discussing here?" He chuckled, a low, mocking sound, glancing around the table as if expecting laughter to follow, as if he'd just delivered a clever quip. No one laughed. The New York executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their expressions unreadable, but their unease palpable. Marcus's colleagues stared at their laptops or the table, avoiding eye contact, as if they could will the moment to pass, as if they could pretend they hadn't heard what they'd heard. Karen Ellison's pen paused, her eyes narrowing slightly as she glanced at Richard, a flicker of something, disapproval, perhaps, crossing her face. Marcus felt the weight of every word, each one laced with an insinuation that went far beyond his work. This wasn't about the presentation or the data. Richard's mockery carried a deeper message, one that everyone in the room could feel but no one would say aloud. Marcus, the only black analyst on the team, didn't belong at this table. The humiliation wasn't just professional. It was personal, rooted in a prejudice Richard had never bothered to hide. Marcus had endured his jokes before the off-hand comments about his urban upbringing, the way Richard would question his qualifications despite his proven track record. But this was different. This was a public attack, delivered in front of the company's most powerful figures, designed to diminish him, to make him feel small in a room full of people who'd seen his work and knew his worth. His mind raced, a storm of thoughts colliding. Should he push back, call out Richard's behavior right there in front of everyone? The risk was enormous. Escalating the situation could make him look unprofessional, could jeopardize his career, especially with the New York execs watching. Or should he swallow the insult, as he'd done so many times before, and keep going, letting his work speak for him? Every fiber of his being screamed to fight back, to demand respect, but he knew the cost of that choice. He took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the clicker for his slides. As I was saying, the churn rate in Q3 shows a clear trend. He continued, his voice steady but laced with a quiet defiance, a refusal to let Richard break him. He wouldn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction, but Richard wasn't done. "You're missing the point," he interrupted again, leaning back in his chair with a dismissive wave of his hand, as if Marcus's entire presentation was a waste of time. "This isn't about your fancy charts, Marcus. It's about whether you can actually deliver. I'm not sure you're cut out for this level of responsibility." The words hit like a slap, each one heavier than the last, each one designed to chip away at Marcus's credibility. The silence in the room grew oppressive, a collective holding of breath, as if everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. Karen Ellison's pen remained still, her gaze now fixed on Richard with a sharpness that hadn't been there before, a look that suggested she was seeing him in a new light. Marcus's colleague, Priya, a senior analyst who'd collaborated with him on the project, couldn't stay silent any longer. "With all due respect, Richard," she said, her voice firm but measured, cutting through the tension like a lifeline. "Marcus's analysis is spot on. His retention model caught a 15% drop in engagement that we'd completely overlooked. He's more than capable." Her words were a rare moment of courage, someone stepping into the fray to defend him, to call out the injustice in front of everyone. But Richard just scoffed, undeterred, his smirk widening as if Priya's defense was amusing. "Capable, let's not oversell it," he said, his tone dripping with mockery, each word a deliberate twist of the knife. "I've been in this game long enough to know who can handle the pressure and who's just along for the ride." The implication was unmistakable, hanging in the air like a toxic cloud, poisoning the room. Marcus's heart pounded, his pulse a deafening drumbeat in his ears, but he refused to give Richard the satisfaction of a reaction. He clicked to the next slide, his voice steady as he pushed through the rest of his presentation, though every word felt like wading through quicksand. He could feel the eyes of the room on him, some sympathetic, others avoiding him altogether, as if they were embarrassed to witness his humiliation. The weight of it pressed down on him, heavy and unrelenting, through every sentence, every chart, every recommendation. The meeting dragged on for another hour, but the damage was done. Marcus finished his presentation, his voice never wavering, earning a curt nod from Karen Ellison, but no further acknowledgement from Richard, who leaned back in his chair, scrolling through his phone as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't just tried to tear Marcus down in front of the entire team. As the team filed out of the conference room, the air thick with unspoken tension, Priya caught Marcus's arm, pulling him aside. "That was unacceptable," she whispered, her voice low but urgent, her eyes flashing with anger. "You need to report this to HR, Marcus. He's been targeting you for months. This wasn't just about the presentation. It was personal, and everyone saw it." Marcus shook his head slightly, his expression guarded, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's not worth it, Priya," he said, the words heavy with resignation. "They'll just say it's his style. I've been through this before." but inside he was seething, a storm of anger and shame raging beneath his calm exterior. He'd spent years proving himself, building a career he was proud of, earning his degree from Morehouse, grinding through late nights and early mornings to get to where he was. To have it undermined so publicly, in front of the company's top brass, was a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. He'd faced prejudice before at other jobs in other rooms, but this was different. This was a deliberate attempt to diminish him, to make him feel like he didn't belong, in a space where his work had already proven otherwise. Over the next week, the incident festered like an open wound, raw and painful. Colleagues whispered about it in the break room, their voices hushed but urgent, as if afraid Richard might overhear. Some offered quiet words of support, stopping by Marcus's desk to say, "You handled it well," or "That was out of line." Others pretended it never happened, avoiding his eyes in the hallways, as if the moment was too uncomfortable to acknowledge. One coworker, Jamal, caught him over coffee one morning, his voice low and serious. "Man, that was rough," he said, shaking his head. "Richard's got it out for you. You okay?" Marcus nodded, managing a tight smile, but the words did little to ease the knot in his stomach, the constant replay of Richard's words in his head. He could still hear the mocking tone, the chuckle, the insinuation that he didn't belong. Richard, meanwhile, acted as if nothing was wrong, as if he hadn't just humiliated Marcus in front of the entire team. He piled a new project on Marcus's plate, a complex data audit with an impossible deadline, as if daring him to crack under the pressure. Marcus worked late every night, his laptop glowing in the dim office as he poured himself into the task, determined to prove Richard wrong, to show that he was more than capable. But the stress was taking a toll. He barely slept, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. His appetite was gone, replaced by a constant churn of anxiety. Every morning, he dreaded walking into the office, knowing Richard's smirk would be waiting, that same smug grin that had haunted him since the meeting. He tried to focus on his work, to let his results speak for him, but the weight of what had happened was a constant companion, dragging him down. Then came the email, a single line that sent his heart racing. It was from Karen Ellison, the VP from New York, requesting a one-on-one meeting with Marcus on Friday. His stomach churned as he read the message, his mind racing with possibilities. Was this about the presentation? Had Richard spun the narrative to paint him as incompetent, as someone who couldn't handle the pressure? The email was brief, professional, and gave no hints about its purpose, leaving Marcus to stew in uncertainty. For the next 3 days, he lived with a constant undercurrent of anxiety. Second, guessing every moment of the meeting, every word he'd said, every slide he'd presented. He replayed Richard's words in his head, each one a reminder of the humiliation he'd endured, each one a question of whether he'd done enough to prove himself. He wondered if he'd made a mistake by not pushing back harder, by not calling out Richard's behavior in the moment. But what could he have said that wouldn't have escalated things further, that wouldn't have painted him as the problem? He'd been in that position before, forced to choose between his dignity and his career, and he'd always chosen the latter, hoping his work would eventually silence the critics. But now, with this meeting looming, he wasn't so sure. On Thursday, Priya pulled him aside again, her voice low and urgent, her eyes scanning the hallway to make sure no one was listening. "I heard something," she said, her words rushed but careful. "Richard's been talking to the New York team, saying you struggled in the meeting and might not be leadership material. He's trying to sabotage you, Marcus." The words hit like a punch to the gut, confirming his worst fears. Marcus had suspected Richard's bias, had felt it in every interaction, but this was different, a calculated behind the scenes effort to undermine his career, to ensure he'd never rise above his current role. He thanked Priya, his voice steady despite the anger boiling inside him, a fire that threatened to consume him. That night, he barely slept, wrestling with his options. Confront Richard directly. The thought was tempting, the image of standing up to him, of calling out his prejudice in front of the team, playing out in his mind like a fantasy. but it could backfire, painting him as the aggressor, giving Richard the ammunition he needed to twist the narrative further. Go to HR, he'd been down that road before at a previous job, only to be told to work it out. With his manager, the complaint dismissed as a misunderstanding. Or should he keep his head down, as he'd always done, and hope his work would speak for itself? The decision weighed on him, heavy and unrelenting, a choice between fighting for his dignity and protecting his career. Friday arrived, and Marcus walked into the small conference room for his meeting with Karen Ellison, his palms sweaty and his heart racing. Karen was alone, seated at the table with a stack of papers in front of her, her expression unreadable. "Marcus, please sit," she said, her tone neutral, giving nothing away. He sat, bracing himself for what was to come, his mind racing with worst-case scenarios. "I've been reviewing your work," she began, her voice steady, professional. "Your retention analysis was exceptional. It's already shaping our strategy for next quarter, and the board is taking notice." Marcus blinked, caught off guard by the praise, the words cutting through the fog of his anxiety. "Thank you, Ms. Ellison," he said, his voice cautious but grateful, a flicker of hope sparking inside him. "But I need to address what happened in that meeting," she continued, her tone sharpening, her eyes locking onto his with a intensity that made him sit up straighter. "Richard's behavior was unprofessional and unacceptable. I've spoken to HR, and they're launching a full investigation into his conduct. I also reviewed your past performance reviews. His feedback on you has been consistently skewed, and we're looking into why." Marcus's breath caught in his throat, his heart pounding. He hadn't expected this. Not the acknowledgement, not the investigation, not the validation of what he'd endured. Karen leaned forward, her voice firm but not unkind. "I want you to know you're being considered for a senior analyst role in New York. Your work speaks for itself, Marcus, and I'm personally ensuring Richard's actions don't derail your career." The words were a lifeline, a glimmer of hope in a moment when Marcus had felt cornered, trapped by the weight of Richard's prejudice. He thanked her, his voice steady but his mind reeling, a whirlwind of emotions. Relief, anger, gratitude, and something else, something like hope. The weight of the past week, the humiliation, the sleepless nights, the fear that Richard's words had poisoned his future, began to lift, but it didn't erase the sting of what had happened. The wound was still there, raw and tender, a reminder of how quickly someone in power could try to tear you down. As he left the meeting, his emotions were a tangled mix of relief, anger, and cautious optimism, a sense that maybe, just maybe, justice was possible. Later that day, Priya caught up with him in the hallway, her eyes wide with news. "You won't believe this," she said, her voice a mix of excitement and disbelief. "Richard's been placed on administrative leave pending the HR investigation. Apparently, other people came forward. Turns out he's been targeting minority staff for years." The news spread through the office like wildfire, the whispers in the break room turning into open conversations, colleagues sharing their own stories of Richard's behavior, moments when he'd belittled them, dismissed their work, or made comments that skirted the line of acceptable, always careful to stay just within the bounds of deniability. For Marcus, it was a bittersweet revelation. He wasn't alone, but the knowledge that others had suffered under Richard's management only deepened the wound, a reminder of how insidious prejudice could be, how it could hide in plain sight, cloaked in tough love or high standards. He didn't celebrate Richard's leave. The victory felt hollow, the humiliation still raw in his memory, a scar that would take time to fade. But as he packed up his desk that evening, his laptop closed and his notes neatly stacked, a flicker of resolve sparked inside him. He'd survived Richard's attempt to break him, had stood tall in the face of humiliation, and now he had a shot at a senior role in New York, a chance to shape the company's future on his own terms, to prove that he was more than the stereotypes Richard had tried to pin on him. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, Marcus felt a sense of possibility, a belief that his work, his voice, could make a difference. Wherever you're reading this, Whether in the sunny sprawl of Los Angeles, the historic streets of Birmingham, the vibrant pulse of Lagos, the quiet corners of Sydney, or anywhere else, ask yourself, how would you handle a boss like Richard? Have you ever faced a moment when someone tried to diminish you, to make you feel like you didn't belong, whether because of your race, your background, or something else? Share your experiences below, because speaking out is the first step to change. Your story matters, and together, we can hold those in power accountable, ensuring that no one else has to endure what Marcus did.